Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're from. Thank you so much for joining us, and a special welcome, as always, to our members and CFCS certified professionals who are tuning in today. We have over 1,300 professionals who registered for today's webinar, 3 costly SIM swap and account takeover fraud mistakes to avoid. And we're here today with Marianne Miller from Prove and Frank McKenna from Point Base, I believe. And the Point Predictive. Okay. And the Franken Fraud crime blog, if you have seen that as well. But before we really get into it and hand it over for their expertise on the topic, just a few things that we go over as always. We are on a browser-based platform. So at first, if you don't succeed and you have audio or visual issues, please go ahead and close out or refresh your browser. Refresh your browser first, and if that doesn't work, go ahead and close out, come back in, and rejoin the presentation. If you are signed onto a VPN, it doesn't always play nice with the platform, so highly recommend signing out of that. If you are like myself and you have 80 tabs open in your browser at all times, it may also help to close out of those and reopen the presentation. If that still doesn't work for you, feel free to throw a message into that Q&A box down below your slide window, and I'll see what I can do to help. So the session is being recorded, and the recording, slides, and certificate of participation will be available to all participants within 3 business days of the presentation. So be out on the lookout for that email when it's posted. If you're not an ACFCS member and you want to receive the deck, you'll need to opt in to be contacted or download it from the resources section on the right-hand side of your media player during the presentation. There will be poll questions, so we do encourage you to participate. And if you have any questions, there is a Q&A box down below your media player. Please, please, please throw that in. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to know. And of course, we always love the interactions. There is also a survey down at the bottom, so please let us know how we do, what you like, what you want to see going forward. Yeah, and we're very excited to have you here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to the much more riveting portion and parts of our presentation. We are here today with Frank McKenna, who is the Chief Fraud Strategist and co-founder of Point Predictive, which is a company that focuses on solving application fraud for the lending industry. He is also the founder of Frank on Fraud, which is a personal blog sharing information and insight from his dedicated fraud fighting career of over 30 years. Frank was also the co-founder of BasePoint Analytics, which helped introduce many new risk and pattern recognition technologies to the banking and mortgage industries, and helped to transform those industries to be more proactive and analytic in their approach to fraud and risk management. I kind of gave the whole thing, but Frank, do you have anything to add there?
That was a great introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm a lifelong fraud fighter myself. I started off as an investigator. I'm a weekend fraud hunter. That's where I get most of my ideas for my blog. I write about 3 articles to 4 articles a week. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about what I think is one of the most devious types of fraud out there, account takeover and SIM swap. So really delighted to be here today and appreciate the opportunity.
All right, and we are also, thank you so much, Frank, and we are also here with Marianne Miller, who is the Fraud and Cybercrime Executive Advisor and VP of Client Experience at Prove. Marianne has held a variety of roles, directorships and executive roles at organizations such as USAA, PayPal, Lloyd's Banking Group, and other technology firms. She's also served on the U.S. Federal Reserve Secure Payments Task Force and is currently a member of the Federal Reserve's Scams Definition and Classification Work Group. That is a mouthful. What a title. She was most recently head of fraud strategy at Vero Bank, where she led the fraud strategy process for transitioning the fintech to nationally chartered challenger bank. Okay, Marianne, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Cheyenne, and I really am delighted to be here with this organization. As Frank said, both Frank and I both started our careers. I started my career on the phone taking, fraud reports from victims of fraud. So I really came up through the ranks and then, began my global career holding leadership roles. And it's just a career and a position that I've enjoyed very much and look forward to continue to enjoy for years to come. And Frank and I are really looking forward today to sharing some of our insights around SIM-swap and account takeover because it's such a important topic right now and will continue to be. And without further delay, let's get going.
All right. Did you want to touch on Prove real fast?
Yes, I would love to. I'm the Vice President of Client Experience and also a fraud and cybercrime advisor at Prove. And at Prove, if you look at the mobile phone that we all carry around in our hands, at Prove, we provide a modern way of proving identity with just the phone. And we do that for the top banks. We do this for marketplaces, retailers, cryptos, healthcare companies. So it's really a way of answering the question, is Marianne Miller presenting Marianne Miller's information in the flow with lots of really important signals that are really required for our fraud fighting in this modern age.
That's awesome. So we can thank you. Can we thank you for device IDs and that sort of thing as well?
Well, device IDs, actually, if you think about phone signals, it's really the next step in the next generation beyond device ID. So it's really, and we'll talk more about it later, but it's really, additional signals for everyone that's on the phone that's really combating account takeover.
That's fantastic. I certainly have more to learn on this topic too. Just to gauge where everybody is at as far as experience goes, we do have a poll question that we've thrown up on the screen. How familiar are you with account takeover and SIM swapping fraud? I'm very familiar. This is a part of my everyday work. I do this all the time. I know this in and out. Or are you fairly familiar? You've seen it here and there. It comes up, but maybe not your number one wheelhouse, not what you deal with on the everyday. Are you not very familiar? You know it's there, it's not really part of your work, but you have heard of these things and you're interested in hearing more. Are you brand new to these typologies? Do you know what they are or do you not know what they are? We'd love to see your thoughts. So please click back over, answer that poll question, and we'll launch into it. And it looks like
I was just thinking about when you were showing this poll years ago, the first time I heard of SIM-swap, I was on a panel and I was presenting to a group, an organization in a face-to-face, and I noticed the other fraud fighter, the other head of fraud that was presenting on the panel with me, kept looking down at her mobile phone, and she seemed very worried during the presentation. And here we found out that was, the first time that a number of her customers, like a couple hundred all at one time, had been SIM swapped. So that was the first time that I heard of SIM swapping, and it was through a worrisome attack. So it's going to be interesting to see how our audience, knows about this.
Definitely, absolutely. All right, we have a good amount of you who have answered this poll. Let's go ahead and push the question. Okay, so the majority of our audience, about 40%, is fairly familiar. Account takeover and SIM swapping fraud comes up from time to time. We do have about 18% who does this every day. So we're excited to see you here, and hopefully you get some fun tips and tricks and takeaways as well. And then we also have, let's see, about 40% who is not very familiar. So it looks like there's a lot to learn in today's session. So for those of the attendees who are in the audience who might not be as familiar, Marianne, can you go ahead and give us an overview on exactly what account takeover and SIM swap fraud is?
Yes, I'll be happy to, Cheyenne. So account takeover as it says here in the slide, it's when a bad actor or fraudster gains unauthorized access to your account. And generally that's with the intent to commit fraud. When they gain access, sometimes it's to gain information to sell as well. But generally, once they gain access, they start to move money out. And this happens usually very rapidly. And it's a very concerning fraud because of the fact that most customers don't find out that they've been a victim of an account takeover until they attempt to maybe use their debit card at a point of sale. They're at the gas station, suddenly their account is empty and they no longer have any funds in their account. So it's a very disturbing fraud for any customer, to see money disappearing from their account. SIM swap fraud, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little more detail here, is when a fraudster goes to a telecom, a telco. So that can be, there's numbers of telecoms here in the US. That's Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and there's lots of other small telcos. And they actually, convince the telco either through having that customer's information or through, and we'll talk about this in a minute, paying insiders to actually switch the user's phone number to a new SIM card so that they can engage in that account takeover. And that is something that's very sophisticated, and it really, what it does is it thwarts and bypasses the authentication attempt. So here, as a bank, you've put in lots of controls, you've invested in putting a one-time password in order to, actually validate that this is your customer. And actually, this is a way that the fraudsters get around it. So we'll talk more in detail, but that is, a high-level explanation.
Thank you so much. And then, Frank, I'm going to hand it over to you just to touch on what would you say the leading methods are for fraudsters who are perpetrating ATO fraud?
Yeah, there's about 5 different methods that I think are super common, and I'm going to walk through them. But kind of talk a little bit about account takeover. I think it's the most devious types of fraud and crime out there. Hackers and fraudsters are not discriminating. They're going to go after any account that's online, and most of us have moved our lives online. So they're not going to discriminate. They're going to go after your online banking accounts. They're going to go after your online retail accounts. If you have a Williams-Sonoma, Brooks Brothers, Nordstrom's, they're going to try to hack into those. Your Twitter account, your Facebook account. If you have mileage accounts, they're going to try to hack into those and steal your miles, your Netflix. There's such an ecosystem that these hackers can break into. So that's why it's so popular on Telegram and some of these, criminal channels, is because there's so much opportunity. And it's a crime that's really difficult to solve because it can be perpetrated through bots. So it's very mechanical and machine-like, and it can operate at very high speeds. So it can be, credential stuff is a good example of that. You can get thousands and thousands of account takeover attempts using bots, or you can have social engineering attacks on commercial accounts, like small business accounts, that can be done by a social engineer that take place over 6 months or a year while they try to social engineer the bank. So it moves very quickly, or it can move very, very, very slowly, and it involves bots and it involves humans. But if we talk about some of those different methods, I think credential stuffing, you have to talk about that first. Credential stuffing is the most frequent, I would say, way that account takeover fraud is occurring today. There's about 87 million credential stuffing attacks every single day. That's about 3.6 million brute force attempts where people are downloading breached data. So they're getting login credentials off of Telegram or the dark web, and they're running bots through and just hitting the account after account. The scale is amazingly large. There was an attack, I think, Imperva Research did a credential stuffing analysis about a year ago, an online bank. Somebody bought 500,000 stolen credentials off of the dark web. They loaded them into a bot. They hit this online bank 12,000 transactions per second. They were hitting 12,000 different accounts trying to break in per second with those 500,000 stolen credentials. There was about 44 million attempts. and they were successful in many cases of breaking into the online account. That's credential stuffing, and that's a really big type of account takeover fraud that we're seeing growing kind of exponentially since 2018. Then there's malware. This is why everybody says don't click on an email, because if you click on an email, it can launch a malware code on your computer. And this is an attack that can be very large scale as well. Think about there was about a year and a half ago called Operation Carabank. I don't know if you recall this particular instance, but there was a spear phishing attack against banks, and bank employees would click on it and it would infiltrate the bank's ATM network, and it would cause the ATM to spit out cash at a specified time of day, and the fraudsters are there to collect the money. That caused $1 billion in damage and hit 100 financial institutions across the world. That's malware. And that's a second way that a lot of these account takeover attacks occur. The third is the one you all are probably victims of every single day: phishing attempts. The average American has 400,000 robotexts that hit their cell phone every single year. Many of those are phishing attempts. That's when somebody's trying to get you to click or respond to them to break into your accounts. Phishing attempts is the third major way. And then Marianne touched on SIM swapping. This is growing by about 500%. The FBI last year reported SIM swap fraud has increased. And the reason why it's increased is because it's a response to one-time passcode. When banks started and companies started to use those one-time passcodes, they started to say, well, we need to SIM swap the phone to get control of the phone to intercept those one-time passcodes. So SIM swap has become a big part of account takeover fraud. And then finally, the least understood method is insider fraud. If you go out to Telegram and some of the dark web channels, you can see ad after ad where these fraudsters are selling access to insiders at telcos to SIM swap, to take over your account. So these are the primary methods that are out there today that are causing a lot of damage.
I feel very familiar with many of those. As far as phishing goes, you always get that UPS package has been delivered text message.
Yes. I think I got one last night.
Oh my goodness. There's no escape. All right. So let's see. So from here, I'm so excited to hear from you about the 5 big trends we see in account takeover fraud, but I'm also very excited to hear from our attendees on what account takeover tactic they think is the most prominent. So click back into your screens if you're multitasking and working on the side. I'm definitely not guilty of that before as a former analyst. Please click back in. Do you think the most prominent tactic is a one-time password, like a multi-factor authentication, an internal carrier fraud like Frank was just speaking about, call center social engineering, maybe that fraud department call, or SMS phishing? Love to hear what you have to say. I definitely have gotten the fraud department call, the phishing, one-time password. I had a fun adventure during the holidays, and that was it was very insightful. It's funny dealing with this on a day-to-day and then having it actually happen to you. All right. What about you, Marianne? Is there a tactic that you've seen personally?
Well, the fraud department call is definitely one that I've seen personally, and that's probably the one that upsets us as fraud fighters the most, because we work for years and years, have worked through the trust of checking with our customers, making sure they haven't become a victim of fraud through different anomaly detection methods, and then all of a sudden now we have the bad actors replicating that, and impersonating that, and then that really hurts the trust of the ability to be able to reach out to your customer in a confident way, because they don't know if it's a fraudster or if it's really your financial institution. So that one is the one that I personally have experienced, but also find the most upsetting.
Absolutely. All right. And it does look like we have a good amount of answers in. So let's see. Ooh, SMS phishing for the win. We have about 50% of our attendees um, who would say that SMS phishing is the most prominent, and 20%, almost a tie between that one-time password and call center social engineering. Um, all right, so I'm going to pass it over to you, Marianne. Do you want to go through some of these trends?
Yeah, so let's talk about this trend is one that actually Frank and I actually wrote about in one of his blogs a few months ago, and it was one that we found very surprising, but I guess at the scale that it was occurring. So, and the way that we found out about it was through intelligence that was captured on Telegram. So there's a professor, his name is David Merriman. He actually goes down and he has a research team that goes down into the Telegram channels and looks at what kind of intelligence that he can find around fraud attacks. And what he found was that there were bad actors that were luring employees of different telcos. T-Mobile is mentioned here, but it happens at Verizon, it happens AT&T and all other telcos, and they actually involve an insider, an employee of that telco, and offer them money. And there's different going rates depending if it's a T-Mobile phone, SIM swap, or AT&T. Generally, it's related to the balance in the account that they have, want to attack or they're aware of. And so what happens is they pay this insider, a fee. I saw up to $750 for like an AT&T SIM swap. Or at least they promise that they'll pay it. That sometimes they don't. So the actual fraudsters defraud the fraudsters. But this is a way that real-time SIM swaps can happen through a payment mechanism, and combining that with the topic of internal fraud.
I think, Marianne, the thing about this one that really concerns me, and I think as a fraud fighter, you kind of want to go on Telegram and see what's happening there. And I started to notice this about 18 months ago, is I started to see something that said T-Mobile Inny, I-N-N-Y. And I was like, what does that mean? And I eventually pieced it together. It means insider. And what they're doing is they're going to these retail locations where these retail clerks are maybe making $18 to $20 an hour and offering them, $300 or $400 a day if they'll do a SIM swap a day for them. And then they're advertising on Telegram, say, I have an insider. They're going into the retail location or calling them and having them SIM swap the phone. To me, this is like a really under the covers problem that we don't know the scale of it yet, but I think it's fairly large.
Yeah. And I, really talk about maybe some of the solutions around it. It really is, working with the telcos to really make sure that they have a good insider threat detection, scenario and program, because it's definitely not, something that's not going away and continues to occur.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We can talk about the next one I think I was going to cover is the fraud department call. We talked a lot about this. The fraud department call is the fastest growing. Phishing, I think the audience got it right. Phishing is the most frequent, but one of the most frequent and fastest growing phishing attempts is the fraud department call. The FTC just came out last week and said the most impersonated individuals in the US are now fraud analysts and the fraud texts that are going out. There's a screenshot here. This says Aaron McKenna, and it shows a cell phone. This was my sister who got hit with this message from the Chase fraud department asking her if she made a $500 charge to Delta Airlines. This is a business account. This is her business. She operates out of 4 locations here in the United States. She immediately responded no, and then somebody was on the phone with her. They got her one-time passcode by fooling her and drained her business accounts. Over $50,000 in a period of 10 minutes from the text to the time her accounts were drained. Because it was a business account, she got no refund. This is killing a lot of businesses out there. It's the fraud department call. It's the #1 fastest growing, I'd say, account takeover technique out there because it works, because it relies on the trust that have been built up through the fraud departments, through all the work that you all do and that we've done. So this is a fraud. This is one of the ones that really, I think, upset us. And so.
Yeah, and Frank, I think you brought up a really good point. I know a lot of times with financial institutions, we focus on our individual retail customers. Well, they're really, when it comes to account takeover, it really can affect businesses, sole proprietors. It can affect, I'm hearing a trend in attacking 401k accounts. So that, it's really important that we, not limit our strategy, or when we're thinking about, how do we really address our strategy, to really look across all the business units in your financial institution to say, who needs protected here? And it's really important.
All right. On that note, I'm going to send it over to you. Do you want to talk about SMS engineering?
Yes. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. So these are I think Frank came up with, I think it was a 400,000, of these messages yearly, and it's just, we get inundated. So what happens is we get these text messages. The bad actors use common text messages. I know I get them when I have a medical appointment, or when I have a salon appointment, or when I'm expecting a package. So we're used to getting these. These are part of the routine of our lives of confirming appointments or notifying us, and in this particular case, in the example that we have here is, of course, oh, you don't know my address. I need to provide, click on this, click here. So the UPS, I'm expecting a UPS package, or I may be already expecting one. And then they trick me into providing information into a site that is controlled by the bad actor. So these are, there's, so many, I guess, messages that go out there in consumer education, but this is definitely one of the tactics that's very, very successful on the bad actor's part, and something that, is very common.
Yeah, I imagine it's, oh, pardon. Go ahead, Frank.
Isn't that the text you got last night, you said? The USPS package returned? Cheyenne?
Oh, I think I got one just the other day. I'm not sure if it was last night. But then I also got like 8 different, oh, there's new tea on sale kind of SMSs too. So I imagine it's really easy to get caught with that one.
Mm-hmm. And then social engineering with call centers. So I think the audience got this right too. This is very common. In fact, PinDrop estimates that about 61% of account takeover can be traced back to call centers. So a majority of the account takeover is still going through the human channel. And it's unfortunately because you can't train up your customer service representatives fast enough. And actually about 50% of customer service representatives aren't even aware, because they don't have the fraud senses that a lot of the fraud people have. So it's almost impossible to control this. And the reason why it's growing so quickly is because these social engineers are able to get into people's online account like Facebook or Twitter and get key pieces of information that give them a good pretext to call the call center. So they can get a date of birth and a name, and then they can use that to call, Chase or any bank really, and go in and then start to use that data to get access to somebody's account with that name. So they use these bits and pieces of information. And this is the most difficult, probably, area to control. There's some technological solutions out there, like PinDrop, that you can kind of try to ring fence a little bit, but it's really all about training and really all about trying to make sure your customer service representatives aren't getting engineered, which often they are. About 1 in every 2,000 calls that go into a call center are a social engineering attempt against a customer service representative. I was a customer service representative. That's where I started my career. And I was doing a couple hundred a day. So statistically, I was probably getting social engineered once every 2 weeks. Sounds low, but it's actually over the course of a year, you're being socially engineered quite a bit in a call center.
Yeah, Frank, I would agree. And what's interesting as fraud fighters, when we put our strategy together, when we think about account takeover, often we're focusing on the online channel, or we're focusing on the mobile channel. but we can't forget about, what I call is your cross-channel approach and defenses. And the call center is definitely one that we really, like you said, policy, procedure, technology is really needed to make sure that we're looking for all those red flags that where, it's a possible account takeover.
For sure.
And I also started my adventure in AML compliance in a call center, and it can be really exhausting working between folks who just don't have the information they need to access their account when they call in, and folks who are trying to, get some details that they shouldn't have. So,
well, it's if you're looking for fraud analysts, the customer service representatives that can find these social engineering that transfer the call to the fraud department, they're good fraud analysts. If you're going to hire somebody, that's where I got my career. Is my first social engineering attempt. I didn't know what was happening, and I transferred to the fraud department. I was like, this is cool. I want to be in the fraud department, not the customer service department.
It's a certain amount of nosy that goes into it where you're like, All right. And what about OTP bots, Marianne?
Oh yeah, OTP bots. So these are, it sounds kind of, futuristic here, but it's not. It's actually occurring all the time. They exploded on Telegram in 2021. And, iSpoof Bank is a good example of this, but these are automated bots. Frank talked earlier about credential stuffing being actually enabled by bots. These are another form of bots that allow, then there's software programs that can generate a one-time password. And so that can trick you as a customer to actually handing over a one-time password to an incorrect third party, or, that's a fraudster. So these are certainly something that's, automated, that can be scripted, and they're definitely designed to get around any kind of authentication process.
I think in the UK, the 200,000 in a period, I think of a couple months, 200,000 consumers fell victim to these OTP bots, which are automated scripts. What makes it especially scary, they're not social engineering one person at a time. They're doing it. People can load up thousands of phone numbers and say, pretend like I'm Chase Bank and call all these customers and get their one-time passcode. And they just sit back and wait. 200,000 customers in the UK fell victim, millions of dollars of losses. They arrested the perpetrator of this, but he was the genesis of these OTP bots, which have now become kind of standard in the account takeover manipulation game. So I think this is a trend we need to pay close attention to.
Absolutely.
Feels harder and harder every day as technology improves. So do our controls, and so do our fraudsters. So with that in mind, what mistake? Let's go into mistakes that organizations make with account takeovers. Marianne, Frank, you both work for some of the largest companies dealing with account takeovers, and you also work with medium-sized companies and startups. What are you seeing as the biggest mistakes these companies are making, Marianne?
So this first mistake is something that really is something that I really am concerned with. And this is when organizations look at their budget, or they look at their acceptance of account takeover. In other words, we're going to budget for so much, X amount of account takeover in our budget, and we're going to accept, that'll be our risk appetite. And for me, I look at it the same way with identity theft, asking the question, you mean we have a risk appetite for identity theft? So I think it's important to really communicate to your management, to your stakeholders, to your organization, all the things that we've been talking about in this webinar today, of the lack of customer trust, once their account has been taken over and the bank hasn't protected the financial institution hasn't protected their money or their information. So really look at the fact that you really need to make sure that your control environment, your policy environment, and your operational environment is really situated to have what I call best practice technology in place, best practice operations in place, and policies in place to protect, your customer's account at all times. And that's really important. So it's really important to change that conversation from, oh, we have a risk appetite for account takeover, to are asking the question, are we doing everything we possibly can to prevent it?
Yeah, and I would definitely want an institution or a company that is looking out for me. What about you, Frank? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so my thought is on the second biggest mistake is not checking if there's been a recent SIM swap. We've grown really accustomed to one-time passcodes as being the de facto, it's safe. If the customer can give that one-time passcode, we know that it's the customer. But because SIM swap is now growing at 500%, the FBI just launched, I think that was a stat earlier this year, the fraudsters have now circumvented that, and they're getting people's phones. They're swapping their phones, so they're intercepting those one-time passcode. And this is really where I think Proof has come up with something that's going to be very important in the ecosystem of account takeover. And what they do is they check before that one-time passcode is, you respond to it. You can say, have we seen a SIM swap? Did somebody at a telco swap that SIM? Is that passcode potentially going to a fraudster? Because that's where the trend is. It's going in that direction. So not checking for those SIM swaps. Did the phone just get swapped? Is it ported over to a new number? Looking for that is critical. And I think we have to keep that in mind in our strategies going forward, because it's happening so often.
That's right. And Frank, that's the way you look at, you're protecting your authenticator. That's really important to look for any kind of, like you said, event that might be thwarting your authenticator that you're using.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's important. If we go to kind of, I think, the third mistake, which is the next slide, which I wanted to touch on, is most organizations out there are ignoring a key component of stopping account takeover, and that's their IVR systems. The rate of social engineering is the same, whether it's through the call center analyst representative, like customer service, as it is through the IVR. So IVRs are notoriously targeted by robodialers that can mine for account numbers or reset PIN numbers or request new cards or PIN numbers. So the IVRs, they're putting robodialers and just trying to get whatever they can through those robodialers. So not paying attention to your IVR systems and building some behavioral activity that's looking at, how often are we getting repeated calls from the same phone number? How often are we getting calls that are being dropped and routed to an agent from a phone number? They're going in the IVR, but they're not passing, and they're going to call center agents. How often are we looking at, PIN requests that are done from similar phone numbers or repeatedly and often? So there's a lot of things you can do with the IVR that I think are important. If you're not doing anything in your IVR, have at least reporting where you can kind of look at some of these. You're missing out on a lot of account takeover attempts and social engineering that's happening. I think this is a mistake that a lot of banks, a lot of companies are not making, is looking at what's happening through those IVR systems.
Right. So move on to the next mistake. Yes, this is one that's really interesting. Sometimes there's a method called voice one-time password. It's different than a one-time password where you receive and you dial in a number. You are verifying via a phone call whether you've received, you're authenticating via a call. What can happen is the bad actors can call forward that number to a number that they control, and then they receive the voice OTP, and then they gain access to the account. So really not having any controls or any signals that look at whether a phone has been call forwarded can be a mistake in your organization. Going back to Frank's theme of data and signals that you look at in your analytics environment, definitely this is a signal that everyone needs to have if you're using voice OTP to authenticate.
I feel like my carrier has opted into this and keeps asking me, and I'm like, I don't know if this is what I want to go. But just a quick clarification, we do have a question. What does IVR
Oh,
stand for, Frank?
um, actually, voice response. It's yeah,
Okay.
internal voice response. So it's when you call the company and it gives you those annoying options. Speak one to speak to an attendant, or
Oh,
two.
okay.
You want to change your PIN number. It's the automated attendant. So the automated attendant is often, they don't want to talk to an agent. They want to stay in the automated attendant. So at banks, you can do a lot of things on the IVR, like get your balance. You can sometimes you can reset your PIN numbers. You can request new cards. There's a lot you can do in those automated attendants. IVR, that's what a lot of that's a technical term for it, but it's that voice response unit that you have to look at.
All right. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Interactive voice response system.
Oh, good.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kamara.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and now let's launch into our fifth mistake.
Yeah, this one's simple. I think people get this, but it happens a lot. Social login activity. So you think about all these account takeover attempts where it's phishing. You got a customer living, close to their home. They're responding to a one-time passcode, but the login's coming from another country or another state. It's kind of looking at the preponderance of what's happening on that account. These OTPs appear to be going to where the customer lives, but the login's happening in a different location. And then there's a subsequent series of events like changing the email address, requesting cards, or requesting a Zelle. So you have to look at the entire picture, looking at the login to the OTP to the subsequent activity. A lot of companies are not looking at that ecosystem and saying, let's put it all together, behavioral monitoring, and make sure that we're intervening or interdicting in the account takeover attempt.
Yeah, sometimes, Frank, we call it implausible geolocation. So sometimes, it's, and it can happen in lots of different scenarios. So it's really an important signal in your, looking at it, like you said, in your machine learning environments.
Yeah, I don't know if some of the companies that I worked for in the past used the OTP, but I definitely remember seeing flags for those discrepancy in geolocation. So just like a classic red flag, this seems to be a technological one that's cropping up as well. That's good to be mindful of. All right, and number 6, Marianne.
Yeah, this one seems like it should be obvious. The telcos are not filtering out, scam SMS traffic. So this SMS traffic, as we talked about earlier, is coming at us left and right. And most, what's called smishing, through SMS, another term like phishing, but just a different take on it, could be caught by telcos because they can see the one-to-many relationships. They can see the velocities associated with them. And I'm definitely hoping in the future, and I know there's been some actions on the FTC part, but I hope to see further actions, around, really looking at these and filtering these out before they even reach, the general population. But this is definitely something that, is a mistake and definitely something that needs work.
Anything to add, Frank?
No, I agree. I think telcos need to get involved. This is going to be big. I think even in the UK, they're talking about having the telcos and social media be responsible in the ecosystem of trying to prevent fraud, because a lot of this is happening. It's outside of the company's control. It's all the telcos and social media. They need to take part in this. So I think this is something that we need to see soon.
Yeah, we get these on, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we get these on our phone calls now, possible scam now, occasionally. It'd be nice to get these with our SMSs too. Possible, spam, possible scam. That would be, a nice additive from the telcos.
Absolutely. And it's what you were saying, Frank. We've had several comments and questions trickle in about accountability for these. So So it's really interesting to see there. We've also had quite a few questions come in on how to prevent these and how to take preventative measures towards these. So what can businesses really do to avoid these pitfalls?
Yeah, Cheyenne, there's lots that you can do, and maybe we can move on to the next slide. But it's as we talked about, and Frank and I did throughout the presentation, that there's signals that are available to really help designate whether a SIM swap's in action. So at Proof, we have something called a trust score, and our trust score really looks at SIM and device velocity and how many changes have been made. It can look at the line type, what type of line, the tenure of that phone. It can look at, is the phone enabled to call forwarding? So there's, lots of indicators around high trust of that phone or low trust of that phone, especially when it comes to a certain event. And this all can be done in real time. So these are real-time signals that I think really need to be part of anyone's fraud prevention and detection environment. And that really can help you once, let's say that you see that a phone, there's unusual activity around, logging into this account, and you also see that you get a indicator that this phone has just been recently SIM swapped. You can actually kill the session, or you can take interdiction. You can not allow that login to occur. So that is something that you can take action on. Also, if you want to move on to the next slide, we can talk about the importance of, there's very much a link between identity and authentication. And, we've talked about these two disciplines as separate disciplines, and they are, but you really need to combine those disciplines when you're looking at your fraud strategy, especially when it comes to account access or moving funds, changing information on an account. So at Proof, what we do is we look at the actual physical possession of the phone using the cryptographic methods. We look at the reputation of the phone, again, the trust score that I just spoke about. And then we look at who owns that phone and what's the relationship between the possession and the trust. And that connects the dots around, at onboarding or during a high-risk event. Is this really Mary Ann, logging in? Is this Mary Ann applying for this account? Is this really Mary Ann changing her address? So these are all what I call, phone signals or identity signals, trust signals that really need to be incorporated in real time in many events that you're having, especially in digital interactions. I've had some banks actually that have had to pause their onboarding experiences because of the attack rate at the onboarding event. So really we're looking at, again, if we aren't confident at the beginning of an onboarding event, and then we want to continue to do continuous authentication related to that identity, it can really be something that starts to fall apart and, add more mule accounts onto our portfolios. So again, these are really deterministic signals that are really important.
Frank, did you have something to add?
No, I think I think it's really important you look at the phone today. That's where a lot of the fraud's occurring. So I completely agree. I was gonna say we can, I don't know if we have I think we got a lot of questions we can answer, but I can kind of give my thoughts on maybe 5 things I think, and then maybe spend 10 minutes answering some of these great questions that are coming through the channel. I think if we go to the next slide, I can just kind of give my thoughts really quickly. Let's do this.
We do have a poll. Do we want to do the poll first?
Yeah, let's do the poll.
All right. So just we want to hear from you. Does your company leverage a trust score to detect SIM swap and other mobile signals to mitigate account takeover? So are you looking at the trust score on a device? Do you build risk ratings around those devices? Is that something that your company has implemented? Do you plan to implement? with here soon within the next 3 to 6 months? Is it looking like it's farther down the trough in 6 to 12 months? Do you not see any plans, or do you just not know? Maybe you're not involved in that process. Maybe you're wheedling your management for more insight into there, and hoping that the budget comes through. But love to hear from you. I know that we had trust scores in the past for accounts, but not necessarily for the technology and the devices. So, or the signals. So it's interesting to see how this has changed, even in the couple of years that I've been out of investigations. All right. And I think we had a question in here. Did you see a change and a trend up with COVID, or how did COVID really impact these account takeovers?
There was a huge increase in account takeover attempts through COVID. If you think about everybody started to go online, including the fraudsters, 500% increase in account takeover attempts online during COVID. And it really hasn't slowed down. And if you think about the driver of that, I really take it back to Telegram. There's almost 100,000 channels now with between 5 and 10,000 members that are actively selling information like breached login credentials, like fulls, like lots of information about customers, and they never stopped. They were going after the government for a lot of the money through PPP, and they just shifted their focus now back to banks because that's where the money is now. So we definitely saw an impact due to COVID.
What was interesting too, Frank, that what I saw, you have a lot of the public sector fraud, the PPP fraud, the unemployment fraud, and they were going into these deposits, were going into mule accounts, and the bad actors were even taking over accounts that they controlled. So you had a bad actor doing an account takeover over another bad actor's account. So they were all fighting over the funds that were being deposited into a mule account and trying to gain control over it. So it was an operational headache for a lot of financial institutions. When you didn't have those identity controls as sound up front, so that these mule account creation came, so that then you had fake claims as well of account takeover. So then you start that cycle where the bad actors have actually claimed that there's an account takeover, but it's not. It's actually a false claim. So that's why, again, these phone signals are so important to understand that, was that the original customer that applied for the account that actually owns and operates that account and is actually communicating with you about that account.
Yeah, looks like things just get more convoluted the more distance we have, the safety of the screen, so to speak. But let's see here. So a lot of our folks, it doesn't look like they're involved with the trust score process, but it looks like there is 11% who they do have a trust score leverage, which is fantastic. Kudos to you. It's always nice to have access to such beneficial resources. And then we have some folks who they don't see any plans to implement. So I guess we'll see what that looks like going forward. I can't imagine that this is going away. But Frank, just to wrap it up before we get into the questions, which thank you so much for all of your questions. There were so many in here that we'll try to get to. What can we do to stop this account takeover?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of real quick, because I know we're running out of time, I want to get to the questions, but telcos, I think we need to have accountability by telcos, by social media that are going to participate in this. We can't do it alone. All of this phishing, these robocalls, it's all going through the telecoms. They're in a really great position to help consumers and stop it. Organizations need to look at their anti-credential stuffing controls. It's happening. Think about the scale of this, 87 million a day. If you don't have something really strong, you're going to get hit. And even if they get 1 out of 1,000 with the scale, it's a big loss to you. Participate in consortium solutions. I really can't stress this enough. Banks tend to be very private and they don't want to share information about fraud. But hey, look at Telegram. There's probably millions of people minute by minute are sharing how to defraud you. If you're not talking and participating in consortiums, you're at a disadvantage. I think you need to open up and participate in these consortiums. You need to educate your consumers about phishing and smishing. They're being targeted. If they don't know what to do, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And finally, leveraging things. Got to look at the phone. This is where I believe all verifications are going to at this point in time, are to the phone. We use the phone, use our face to open up our phone. There's a day, and it's very secure. Everything's going to go that way with passkeys and everything else. So the phone is going to become core. So you need to leverage a trust score or some method to say, yes, I trust that phone. And those are 5 things I think you can do, put in your artillery to help stop frauds and scams.
All right. And in that same vein, what do we think is the future of preventing account takeover? We do have the new passwordless innovations, like you were saying, biometrics, passkeys, identity binding, tokens. Marianne, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is what's really great about the future. I think we'll start to move away from OTPs, and I think what we'll look at is better identity proofing, during the onboarding experience, and better identity checking during each authentication event. But in a way that it allows a passwordless environment. And I like to say that passwordless doesn't mean less secure; it means more secure. So you have all these signals in the background, all of this information, this data science, these analytics in the background, enabling this passwordless environment and enabling a better customer experience. So I'm really looking forward to the future of authentication, the future of identity proofing, not only within financial services, but within all of our interactions of daily life, whether it's our healthcare experiences, whether it's our experiences in e-commerce, that, I think in the next 5 years, we'll start to see lots of changes. Again, securing our accounts, but also easing that customer experience as well. So hopefully that SIM swap will be something of the past, and we'll have a much better environment in the future.
All right, Frank, anything to add there?
No, I think Marianne did a great job on that. I'm trying to answer some of these questions just via chat. So then we're getting to the end, but there's some really good questions here.
There are so many. Thank you so much for your participation. We have a quick clarification here. Is SIM swapping considered to be a subset of account takeover, or is it considered to be a separate fraud typology?
It's a method. It's a method or a tactic to conduct account takeover, and it's specific to controlling the one-time password that's sent to the customer and gaining control of that one-time password.
Right, and I'm so sorry. Also sifting through all of these questions. If we don't get to everything, because I know that we're looking at the end of the hour, we will reach out to you. We'll send those questions over, and we'll try to reach out to you after the presentation is over.
Yeah,
Pardon, Frank.
I see a few that you can almost answer, like, how do you know about a SIM swap? How was it recently done? There's like 3 or 4 that are along that vein. And that, Marianne, I think goes to what you were talking about, being able to go to the carrier or to be able to go to the telcos and see, has it recently been ported? I think that's what you do kind of in real time, right? Where you're able to kind of, and that's, I think, just answering that question, absolutely, you can tell if somebody's been SIM swapped or ported recently with an automated solution in real time.
That's right. That's what we do at Prove every day, and with some of the largest and financial institutions across the country, and that is really provide those real-time signals so that those so action can be taken in real time.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the relationship with the telco company would be necessary in order to get that information. Is that correct?
That's right. And Prove has those relationships, and we manage that for you.
Hey, Shine, I got a question. Are these questions that came up in the panel here something we can answer offline and get them back to the audience? Like Marianne was...
Absolutely. Yeah, we're taking away at a time. We will hold on to your questions and we will pass them to Frank and Mary Ann, and they will reach out to you folks as best as possible, of course, because there are a ton of questions in there to get back to you on those questions. We are on the hour. So I just want to give a big thank you to Frank and Marianne. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. So much knowledge, so much insight, such an amazing topic.
An interesting topic for sure. It's been great. Thank you very much for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Thanks.
And just as a reminder to our attendees, the certificate of participation is available for your download in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And the slides are available for download on the right-hand side. The session was recorded, so the recording, slides, and that certificate of participation, if you are a member, will be available on our learning platform within 3 business days. So be on the lookout again for when that's posted. And thank you all for joining us today. Keep fighting the good fight.
Everybody.